to the Harmony of Interest series, where we will explore ideas that positively shape our world. I'm very excited to talk to Eric Meyer, who is the founder and executive director of Generation Atomic, with a mission to energize and empower today's generations to advocate for a nuclear future. Eric, thanks so much for your time.
Hey, you're welcome. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So before we talk about your organization, could you talk a little bit about your background and where you came up? And I first heard about you singing actually about nuclear. So I would love the audience to hear a little bit about your background.
Sure, yeah. Well, I grew up in a really small town on the fringes of the Minnesota prairie, about 15 miles from the South Dakota border, called Tyler, Minnesota. And the kind of most significant part about this area is it's on a geologic formation called the Buffalo Ridge. And that makes it a higher plateau when the kind of glaciers ran out of steam, really good farmland, and really good wind speeds. So, growing up there, I was constantly surrounded by wind towers. Also, it was kind of a poster child location for ethanol. So I was constantly thinking about sustainable energy. I remember conversations with my dad, when we're driving I was a roofer with him. He runs a roofing business, and you're going by all these cornfields, having the conversation like, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if we didn't have to pump any oil out of the ground and we could just grow everything we needed. So I think, those are kind of my roots of thinking about the problem of climate change and how we should really be searching for a solution where there's energy abundance rather than thinking about all the different ways we can cut back. Certainly there's room for more efficiency and all of that, but when there's 3 billion people in the world that use less electricity in a year than a refrigerator does, we need a lot more energy out there. And then, fast forward a few years to college. I'm studying music at the time, thinking maybe be a music teacher. I was having a lot of success singing, maybe be an opera singer. It's just one of those minor things you think wouldn't make a huge change in your life. But a friend sent me a TED Talk about molten salt reactors. And in it, the speaker was talking about how a golf ball sized chunk of thorium, in this case, but uranium also applies, but a golf ball sized chunk could provide the lifetime supply of energy for one person. And I had never realized the energy density of nuclear fission up until that moment. And that was like a complete switch flipped in my mind. I started thinking back, well, wait a second, what do I actually know about nuclear right now? It was all based on The Simpsons, 100%, never talked about it in high school or anything like that, which I think is a problem that needs to be addressed. We need to have more all-encompassing energy education in schools. But anyway, at that point, I started thinking about, what I could do. I'm having some success singing. Maybe I'll rewrite some arias. I just recently performed Carmen in Washington State with the Idaho, what was it? The Idaho Symphony, or wait, it was right on the border between Washington and Idaho. So I was like, is it the Washington or Idaho Symphony? It was a few years ago. I think it was a Washington Symphony. Anyway, performed with them. And so, at that point, going to decided to go to the climate talks. And, once I realized the energy density of nuclear power, I thought, man, I gotta do something about this. But it wasn't really until 2012 when the city I lived in and was going to school in Duluth, Minnesota, experienced a 500-year flood. And I was over at a friend's house playing some video games, and I realized, wow, this is actually, I should try to get home here. And on the drive home, there was a spot where usually a tiny creek had become a raging river. And I wasn't able to get through an intersection, and pretty soon, the water's up to the window, and I'm hopping out of the car and swimming to safety. And at that moment, I decided, you know what, there are probably enough opera singers in the world, but with climate change getting worse, what we need is more nuclear advocates. Nobody's standing up for this technology. It could play such an important role. So I started to figure out, you're not sure what exactly you're going to do at that moment, but I eventually figured out, hey, I should tour a nuclear plant. Went to Diablo Canyon in 2014 and met some people who worked there, learned more about it.
Diablo Canyon's in California, and it's one of the most beautiful areas in the world from the pictures that I've seen.
Oh yeah, it is astoundingly beautiful, and right on either side of it is a nature reserve. The Point Bouchon Trail is just north of it, and I've done some native species bird watching, bird monitoring with the Mothers for Nuclear up there. And that one plant is about 10% of California's clean electricity. It's just amazing. Or actually 10% of all of its electricity, about 20% of the clean electricity. Anyway, so I went to grad school to learn a little bit more about organizing, about managing a nonprofit, about political engagement. And right out of college, I wanted to start a nonprofit right away, but a couple friends of mine had jobs at the Minnesota Nurses Association, and it was just too good of an offer to pass up at that moment. I was like, all right, let's pay down some student loans for a while here. But it really gave me an opportunity to build my organizing skills and learn a lot about the labor movement at the time.
I saw that. Yeah, you've done union organizing, labor organizing as kind of your start. You studied after music, advocacy and political leadership, I believe, and you've done campaign work, campaign manager work. You've been civically engaged for some time before coming to Generation Atomic, and doing a lot of work with the Labor Radio Podcast Network. That also really piqued my interest.
Yeah, I feel like organized labor could be and should be one of the champions of this power source, and we gotta, I think it's partially on my shoulders, but other nuclear advocates to make the case to folks that are in the nuclear industry who haven't maybe fully realized how important they are at this juncture in history, to help them see that and show them ways to get involved in what we're doing.
Cool. So Generation Atomic, what is it? And talk a little bit about the process of starting it.
Yeah, sure. So, right before I started Generation Atomic, I was working in California with Michael Schellenberger at Environmental Progress. And we organized 2 marches for nuclear power in Chicago and in California, and then a giant rally to save the nuclear plants in New York over that short amount of time. And then we got to a point in the fall where it was like, what do we need right now? Michael was thinking, I think I need to write a book, and I was thinking, I think I need to do more grassroots organizing. So I decided to kind of split off and start my own effort there. It was bootstrapping for almost 7-8 months before we were able to get some work in Ohio, doing door-to-door canvassing and trying to save the nuclear plants there, pass a bill that would do that. So throughout this process, a big core tenet has been volunteer activism and building and sustaining a culture around that. Because there's a lot of passionate people out there who care about this, but they don't know what to do. They might not feel like they have the skills to be effective. And we try to provide that with a lot that we offer.
So nuclear is such a contentious issue in the United States and in most of the West, not in China, obviously, and not in Russia. And in some ways it shouldn't be in here because we have almost a 70-year history of generating electricity from nuclear. And we have more nuclear power plants in the US than in any other country, even though our shutdowns are accelerating, and we will be surpassed if we don't change the current direction. And my coming to better understanding nuclear as well, I grew up with all the negative tropes and stereotypes, like The Simpsons. You have the radioactive green waste sludge that gets knocked over, and you got the bumbling Homer Simpson at the controls of the nuclear power plant. And then I heard about the waste, heard about Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, and but then I started learning more about the energy density, and that all energy produces some type of waste. And I through some self-education, I came to the conclusion that atomic energy is the most advanced and is the best form that we currently have. And I think we could eventually get to fusion, but right now we've mastered this technology. And yet when I bring it up to folks, a lot of people just are completely uninformed and are passionately against it. And something that you do with Generation Atomic is that you don't attack people. You kind of have this ability to storytell and to interact, focusing on values. And I've even watched a video once of you where being confronted by an environmentalist who was anti-nuclear, and you kind of brought it back, and you're like, I understand you care about the environment. I do too, and trying to bring that. But could you talk a bit about the ethos of this campaigning and just the model of Generation Atomic when you try to increase support and awareness and build education amongst the people?
Yeah, absolutely. When you started out, you mentioned that you kind of discovered this through research on your own. And I was just reflecting just now how actually kind of common that story is for people that have come to see the importance of nuclear energy. And the reason is there's not a lot of other opportunities for people to learn about this technology. It's really, it's a lot of it is left to serendipity of a friend sending you a YouTube video, like in my case, or you see a meme and maybe you fall down a little bit of a rabbit hole, and that's something that I hope we can decrease the necessity of, or I guess increase how often it happens when people stumble across this. But yeah, I mean, all that is to say, you can't really blame people for not knowing about it, for not liking it by default, because that's the only narrative they've ever heard. And I think when you start with that kind of empathy in seeing where people are at, remembering maybe if you were once there, what that was like, that's a great first step. And from then there's the two-step process we call validating and reframing, which means essentially that when you're validating, if somebody has a concern about nuclear, you're not saying that concern is correct necessarily, but you're saying that it is totally acceptable that they have it and that they think that, and it's not their fault, and they're not wrong for thinking that. And if you can validate somebody well, then they will actually listen what you have to say after that. And this isn't the instinctual thing for people to do, especially engineers who would love to just pull up whatever statistic or fact that will prove that person wrong on their phone and say, well, look at this. And
I'll beat you with these facts. And then
exactly.
It doesn't really go anywhere after that.
And this is supported by, X amount of scientists in this international body. And and it doesn't actually, if you look at the social science research on this, it doesn't matter how many credible voices you have that support your position if the person doesn't feel heard, if they don't feel like they're a part of the conversation and that their concerns have been listened to. So that's really the key thing. And then the reframing aspect is is all about identifying kind of what that person's core concern is. So maybe if they talk about Fukushima and Chernobyl, they're concerned about public safety. And then, if they're concerned about nuclear waste, they're maybe concerned about pollution. So for that, as an example, they might say, well, what about the waste? And you can say, yeah, it's that's something we definitely need to deal with and make sure we're treating responsibly. But honestly, for me, the waste is one of the best parts about nuclear, because we contain every bit of it and we know where it is, and there's not a lot of it. And on the other hand, having nuclear waste means we're not having more coal waste, which is in the sky and in people's lungs and giving kids asthma. And NASA looked at this in 2013, and they determined that about 2 million lives have been saved just by having a nuclear plant where a coal plant would have been. And then, hopefully that helps people kind of see it in a different perspective. Wow, nuclear waste actually means that there isn't coal waste, and as a result, less people have suffered health impacts from it.
And we have technology for almost 50 years that waste, so-called waste, you can recycle it and actually create more energy and power from it. So, okay, the waste side, but what about solar panels? Why even, solar panels are clean and wind is clean. So why not just use that instead? How would you answer that? Because that people are always going to go there next,
That's a question you'll hear a lot, and obviously with the economic improvements that solar especially has made over the last few years, that argument is getting stronger, I would say. But I look at it from the perspective of an environmentalist, where the less land, the less area we're using means the less animal habitat we're impacting. And the less that we have to mine per unit of energy produced to make these panels, and then make the storage systems that are required to make them reliable power. That's the better for the environment. The less we have to use of nature means the more nature gets to use it. So I always look at it like that. But at this moment, I don't think anybody can deny that we need as much clean energy as possible. And we've built up the ability to manufacture so much solar so quickly and send it all over the world. And there are situations, microgrids, things like that, where solar really is the best bet. And in sunny locations, the economics can make sense. So it's gonna take everybody to get to low carbon, to get to net zero as quickly as possible. Maybe in 50 years or 60 years, when hopefully we're manufacturing nuclear plants and shipyards, and we're able to make carbon neutral synthetic fuels and all this other good stuff, we can talk about what's better for the environment, what's more feasible to do. Replace all the solar panels again, which we would have already twice by that time, considering their shorter lifespan, or do something else like fission, or who knows, maybe fusion by then.
Yeah, and I always bring up the point that the solar panels, I think over 50% are built in China, which is primarily funded, or electricity is coming from coal, and the manufacturing is coming from coal, though they are trying to replace all their coal with fission and nuclear. Yeah. So it has already a major carbon footprint. And then wind and solar oftentimes don't produce enough electricity to be self-generating, in the sense that you're almost always going to need like another source of energy to actually use fabrication machines and things like that, and to be able to fabricate the metal and build a lot of that. And then of course, like the natural gas as being the backup is a huge part of wind and solar, because it's not consistent, it depends on the sun and the wind, that you're going to have these peaker gas plants that are built on oftentimes fracking. And if you don't like fracking, natural gas and wind and solar they go complementary together.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And in places that already have a bit of nuclear, we've seen examples of the renewables actually causing the nuclear plants to go out of business, or the nuclear plants to run less frequently, and as a result, having more gas come on the grid. This happened in Iowa with the shutdown of Duane Arnold, which is directly a result of building a bunch of wind in the state, and which sends the electricity prices negative. And it's not really nuclear plants, especially of the era of the 60s and 70s, are not designed to ramp up and down. Why would you really, when you have the option to run just full on out breaker to breaker for 18 months at a time? Same thing in Ontario, where the government mandated the installation of several gigawatts of wind energy, but as a result, they needed more flexibility in ramping, and we've seen nuclear plants shut down, and now I would say that it's a big factor in the upcoming shutdown of Pickering Nuclear Station in 24 and 25. And you look at the numbers on the carbon intensity, and like, how do we add renewables but the power got dirtier? And that's when the policymakers aren't looking at the system holistically. And it's very frustrating as a nuclear advocate, because you don't want to come out sounding super anti-renewables, because it's a good way to shut down conversations right away. But at the same time, you do see these examples of these other clean energy sources kind of cannibalizing and pushing nuclear out of the market decades before it had to be.
And so I do want to get into some more of the campaigns and just some of the current lay of the land. But before going into that, before actually recording, we were talking a bit about psychology of scarcity and guilt. Mm-hmm. And my experience as a Peace Corps volunteer in Zambia, I saw, people, I lived in an area with no electricity, no running water, cooking over an open flame. And while it was a novelty for me, and I, learned a lot from it, I could leave whenever I wanted. I had that privilege. While everyone in this very impoverished area, I actually saw children with distended bellies and things like that, because they were completely dependent on just the agriculture that they could grow in very primitive manner. And I sometimes hear people talk about appropriate technology, and where like, okay, they should just get a clean wood burning stove, and in some ways, like, I understand where that mindset comes from. I may have even had that, 20 years ago, but having lived in these places, everyone wants modernity, that no one wants to spend 7 hours hand washing their clothes if you can just throw it in the washing machine. So I want to talk a little bit about that mindset of the scarcity, and maybe feeling guilty about having these things, and just this austerity agenda that continues to pop up again and again, that instead of like trying to produce abundance through cooperation, we're oftentimes falling back with this question of like austerity and this scarcity model. So I'd love to just get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it has its roots in Malthusianism and the population bomb.
What is Malthusianism for the audience that may not know that?
Oh man, well, yeah, it goes back to this guy Thomas Malthus, who essentially was saying that if that humans are kind of the same as animals, in that we will, if we have enough food, we'll multiply, and we'll eat and multiply until there's not enough food for everyone, and then there'll be massive starvation at that point. So he's kind of an advocate for poor people starving to death.
and he has this like graph where it's like food supply is linear, and then human growth is exponential, and growth will go over the linear point at some time, and that's when scarcity and death happens, where there's no concept of like technological improvements and new tools that now show that we can produce more food with less people than ever before, ever imagined back in his day.
Yeah.
Yet it still comes up today. Instead, people are still believing it.
And even though it's well established that the more energy access, the birth rate actually goes down and stabilizes. The correlation between that also, correlates with education of women and girls and opportunity. And all of these things are beneficial in a synergistic way that Malthus didn't understand. The population bomb, forgetting what's his name?
Paul Ehrlich, who was in Obama's administration, I believe, or no, John Holdren was, and who was influenced and was underling of the population bomb, John Ehrlich.
Yeah, and it's still a really common thread that you hear in environmental circles. I attend meetings for folks in the Climate Reality Project and Sunrise sometimes, and a few other environmental groups. And it seems like there's always a couple people in the room who really think that there's an awful lot of humans around. And, we saw it in Planet of the Humans too. And it's just not a position that's supported by the science. And it's inhumane and immoral, I think, to kind of openly wonder and hope for a rapid decline in the population. Oh,
but not me.
Was a little
the
deadlier.
Other people.
Yeah,
not my family, but the other people.
Yeah, exactly. And you see it at the climate talks too, which I've been to 4 of them now, where there's a very paternalistic view of energy, where everybody in sub-Saharan Africa and rural India and China kind of got to take one for the team. They can have a solar panel and a little battery, and that's all fine. But having a robust electricity grid, industrialization, air conditioning, refrigeration at the scale that Western nations do, that's not going to work. Sorry, it's infuriating. But just another thing that I think we can cut through by offering a different solution, a vision of energy abundance, of universal prosperity. Now that we have nuclear energy, I really feel like scarcity is a choice that we're making, whether or not we realize it.
Yeah, and the other thing that will be thrown oftentimes is like, well, it costs too much. It costs too much. And the reality, though, is that the space program cost too much until the return on investment gave us everything. And every dollar we put in the space program, we got $10 back. And I think the same will happen whether we build these huge grids in Africa or we continue to lower the price of electricity in the United States and just build out the grid here as well.
Yeah. I was looking at some statistics the other day, and I was like, how many jobs are created for every 100 nuclear jobs? And I found out it's 66 other jobs in the community. And that's quite the payoff and quite the investment in the future of a community. I mean, solar and wind projects, it's all the jobs are really on the front end, the construction, and you get a few maintenance folks. There's a study that was done recently that just looked at the parking lots of different types of power stations, and you'll find because a nuclear plant takes between 600 and 1,000 people. It could probably take less, honestly. We probably don't need that level of security, and certainly more things in the future will be automated. But it's good, well-paying jobs for decades. Most of them over $100,000 a year. You don't really see that in other industries, especially for a job you can get with a high school degree. It's incredible.
So what are some of the campaigns that you're working on with Generation Atomic? If you go on the website, you have one campaign looking at saving plants, jobs, and communities, the American Nuclear Infrastructure Act, Rare Earth Cooperative 21st Century Manufacturing Act is something that you've been also supporting. And as I understand it, you have the 501c3 and you also have a 501c4 that you can actually do political advocacy. So I guess what are some of the campaigns you're looking at? And obviously we have a new administration.
Yeah, I'm really bullish on the future of nuclear on the federal side of things. We just had the American Nuclear Infrastructure Act pass out of its Senate committee late last year. um, with bipartisan support. Cory Booker, Sheldon Whitehouse, these Democrats from New Jersey and Rhode Island being on the same page as Republicans like Barrasso and Crapo from places like West Virginia and Wyoming, and in Idaho. So you don't see bipartisan cooperation like that these days, it seems like, which gives me a high hopes. And this bill really did a good job of addressing the many issues the U.S. nuclear industry faces. One of which is that we can't get our advanced designs assessed quickly enough. There's just too much regulation, red tape to get the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to give it the stamp of approval. And we've seen the result of this. We haven't actually completed a nuclear plant in this country, other than I think Watts Bar was the only exception since the NRC came into existence in the mid 70s. And even that application was started before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission became a thing. So, I mean, you just imagine that.
Yeah, and you have South Korea building plants, under budget, under time.
Yeah.
China's building plants. You even got, Middle Eastern countries building plants under budget and, in the timeline.
Russia's cranking them out at a rate of 36 reactors a year. And we've kind of lost that competency right now. So I think this bill will go a long way in rebuilding that. It also takes a look at a targeted credit program. It has a targeted credit program for the existing reactors that are under financial duress. And I was just looking at the number. There's 9 in the U.S. and then the Canadian plant I mentioned, Pickering. They're all going to close for 2025. And when you look at that amount of power, that is more than all of the solar we've generated this year. It's a good chunk of the wind as well. So, we're going backwards on climate if we let these plants shut down. So I'm really, really happy to see progress of that on a federal level. And on a state level, we got a long ways to go. I mean, it's not even legal to build nuclear in 12 states, including my own of Minnesota. just like, it's a little bit personal, especially that my state senator, John Marty, was the guy who passed that ban in 1994. And I've talked to him about it once, but he's just like, I don't work on energy anymore. I'm into healthcare. You got to clean up your mess here, man. You're limiting our chances of success.
And I would like to also, outside of climate, I mean, there is a national security component and there's a actual economic competition component where the United States didn't just one day wake up and say, hey, we're, a quarter of the world's manufacturing. Now, all of that has gone, most of that has gone to China, and we need to rebuild these capabilities. But as China is building all these plants and they have high-speed rail all over their country now, they have 20,000 kilometers that they built in the last 10 years. The ability to move goods and people and to be able to manufacture at very low costs because they've invested in all these energy systems will make will lock in a lot of their competitive advantage as we continue to face things like in California where they're closing San Luis Obispo and there's blackouts going on, because they don't have enough base load power anymore and they haven't reinvested into the actual infrastructure. And then on top of that, I'm very interested in foreign affairs, and nuclear provides long-term partnerships and alliances because you have an entire fuel supply relationship with a country, that can last for, if they have a plant for 50 years, you lock in that relationship for 50 years. And China now is locking in these relationships, and so is Russia. And the US has been completely absent in leadership. So on all those different levels, I mean, we need to think much bigger too than than just like our locale as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And that was the central one of the central thrusts of the Atoms for Peace initiative that Eisenhower kicked off. And it's a big, I think, undersung reason for how the United States secured so much soft power. And maybe, you could argue it was one of the major deciding factors in helping us win the Cold War, even. Because we were able to forge these long-term alliances that were mutually economically beneficial with these other countries and build a lot of trust that we're good partners in this. And there are a lot of countries that probably would rather not work with Russia, seeing that Russia has in the past turned off people's supply to gas, for example. They did that to Estonia in the early 90s. And they would rather not have a Russian boot on their neck in terms of their energy supply. So that really weakens your negotiating position. I guess Germany doesn't seem to have a problem with this, but that might have something to do with the former chancellor, Gerhard Schroeder, now being the chairman of the Russian gas company, Gazprom. It's just...
So could you talk a little bit about Germany shutting its nuclear power plants and with this idea of doing like build outs of huge renewable grids of wind and solar? And could you talk a little bit as that case study? Because you do, I think I've seen some media that Generation Atomic has at least created or promoted about Germany closing down their reactors.
Yeah, it's such a perfect case study to see what happens when you close your reactors down early, especially because they're right next door to nuclear heavy France. And the results pretty clear. Because you're closing this reliable source of clean energy, you need some other reliable source to back it up. So they just commissioned a new coal plant. Datteln 4 started up last year. They kicked back their coal phase out date to 2038. Hopefully, fingers crossed on that. I'm a little bit questionable whether they're actually going to make that. And as a result, they have to bulldoze ancient forests and villages to get the brown lignite coal. It's like the dirtiest coal there is, least efficient coal there is, beneath it. We crunched the numbers on how many nuclear plants Germany would have had to keep open to match the annual output from that mine, that bulldozed village in the Hambach forest. It was only 3 nuclear plants that they would have just had to keep to match that output. But no, they've decided that under threat of tsunami, I guess, that they need to close their plants down. And it's really bizarre because Germans are some of the biggest tourists to these radioactive spa across the border in the Czech Republic, where people literally pay money to go bathe in radium laced water and breathe radon gas. But this nuclear plant that produces in a year less radiation, if you live next to it, less radiation than you get from eating a banana, is just too radioactive, too dangerous, too risky. It's incredible. And you point these facts out, and it's just doesn't work. I guess we need to use the validate and reframe method.
Yeah, the cognitive dissonance is just so crazy. And, France, it's over 70%, I believe, is nuclear. It was higher. I think it's gone down a little bit. But France shows, de Gaulle at one point said, we're not going to deal with these supply chains anymore. We're going to have our own self-sufficiency and sovereignty on our own ability to create electricity and energy. And so there was a huge build out. And France has shown the world that you can, base your entire economy and prosperity on a nuclear base load. And I do love the fact that with Generation Atomic, you've done different types of interventions. And could you talk a bit about the 200 pounds of bananas that you brought into a climate talk or a climate event?
Yeah, absolutely. That was at the climate talks in Bonn, Germany. Which I think was probably the closest I've ever been to getting beaten up by anti-nuclear activists. But anyway, one morning we decided that we were going to go get to the conference super early and put bananas on every single expo booth's table with a sticker on it that's like, "Good morning. Today your breakfast is provided by Nuclear for Climate. Did you know this ordinary banana gives you more radiation than living next to a nuclear power plant for a year?" So our booth was pretty busy that day. A lot of people had quite like, "Is this true? What, why is this banana radioactive? Did you irradiate it?" And then, watching people's minds explode when you say that pretty much all bananas are irradiated to prevent pathogens in the transfer and storage as a food safety issue. And then, even more so when they realize how much potassium 40 is naturally occurring in a banana, and it's one of the minerals your body needs to survive. So we're always thinking about different creative ways to get people to look at this subject a little bit differently, and I'm sure we'll probably do that one again.
You also sing, and you create some amazing songs, and you have a beautiful operatic voice. And I don't want to put you on the spot. You probably haven't warmed up your vocal cords, but do you have like a go-to song that you just spontaneously burst out in the crowd? And I've seen just these reactions as people are being filmed and you're singing these, like this beautiful, song.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, I think, I'm kind of due to write a few more this year, but my go-to as of late has been a redux of "It's Now or Never," which is originally based on a different Italian aria before that. But yeah, so it goes from I changed it from "It's Now or Never" to "Clean Power Forever." So it sounds a little bit something like "Clean power forever within our grasp, wind, nuclear, solar up to the task, hydro, geothermal too, clean power forever, no CO2. Something like that.
Bravo. That's awesome, man. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a good way to it's a good party trick. Good way to get some attention. And then, if you can get people singing along too, we did that in Europe a couple times. That's such a powerful bonding experience, I think. And it really says a lot to passersby that this is a group of people that really care and really trust each other, that they're going to sing a song.
And art has a way to break down the barriers too. And, and just that solidarity of singing and hearing music and song. And yeah, I think it's just a beautifully inventive way to get the message out there. And so a lot of respect on that. And
thanks.
For the work
yeah. The latest musical collaboration I did was actually a rap song.
I saw that.
See that one. And then Baba Brinkman has another one coming out, I think this week, about molten salt reactors. So that'll be fun. Keep your eye out for that.
Check that out. Yeah. So looking ahead, we have a new administration, and what are some of the focuses that Generation Atomic is going to be campaigning in 2021?
Yeah, there's a lot of energy around this idea of the Green New Deal, even though I think that term has become politically problematic for maybe Democrats in more moderate districts and certainly Republicans. But the idea that you can build back better, you can create lots of jobs, and we can clean up our energy economy with more nuclear, with more renewables. I think that one is here to stay, and I'm thrilled to see nuclear now in the Democratic Party platform, have it explicitly mentioned in Joe Biden's. I gotta get used to saying President Biden now. I love it. Yeah. President Biden's energy plans. And over the next 4 years, we're looking at several $billion going into research and development, demonstration projects even of advanced reactors. We got the natrium reactor, which is a sodium cooled fast reactor with a molten salt storage. That's a TerraPower, Bill Gates's company, and General Electric Hitachi collaboration there. X Energy is another recipient of that award. They have a gas cooled reactor. And then Canada's going gangbusters too with their SMR roadmap. And their equivalent of their NRC up there is moving along quite well with certifying multiple designs of small modular reactors and even micro reactors. Oklo is another one in the U.S. that I'm pretty excited about. So this is the 2020s are going to be the decade of demonstration for advanced nuclear, and I'm happy to see that in some of this legislation and some of the funding priorities of the national labs. They're taking the concept of like how do we commercialize these and actually build them quickly and around the world, and that there's a lot of work being put into that, like getting these things on the ground into places where they're needed. So I think 2020s, thanks in part to this the initiatives of at least I'm not a big fan of President Trump, but at least he didn't slow down the nuclear stuff very much. I think he probably wasn't paying a whole lot of attention, which is great. But now that we have a lot of intention on addressing climate change, 2020 is going to be great for advanced reactors. And then 2030s, I think we're building them like crazy.
And the Department of Energy's research labs are some of the best in the world, and they're government owned, and it is something that we should be investing so much into, because there's such this return on investment of the new technologies that we can bring to commercial use. Mm-hmm. And it's also really good to hear that the Democratic Party, after 40 years, has returned to 1950s Democrats in supporting nuclear energy. So that's progress, I guess, in some ways. Mm-hmm. And then we need to build the infrastructure everywhere. The American Society for Civil Engineers, they come out with a report card every 2 to 3 years, I believe. And the last one in 2018, I think, was around like $4 trillion deficit from roads, bridges, electrical systems, and things like that. And I just heard over the weekend, the conservative Democratic senator from West Virginia, Senator Manchin, is even talking about, $2, $3, even $4 trillion to go into infrastructure. So this could also be a time where we rebuild our infrastructure based on atomic energy and on this baseload power, and just showing the ability that the U.S. can continue being a leader in this sector, in this field. So I am very optimistic, but it's going to take a lot of pushing, and it's going to take a lot of work from organizations like Generation Atomic to really get people who may be guarded and even anti-nuclear to at least be open to the new ideas.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I have a lot of faith in in our supporters and in nuclear advocates around our country, that they can be a big part of this solution. So that's why we put on these trainings on how to have a more effective visit with your elected official, a more persuasive visit, and trainings on how to present to your local chapter of your Rotary Club or Boy Scouts or whatever it might be, because we feel like the broader base we can build, that means the more people who are talking to their elected officials, and when the question comes up, they're thinking, well, actually I have a lot of constituents that have been talking to me about this. So it seems I'm pretty safe to make in the past what might have seemed a more controversial decision in support of this. So I think, the grassroots has to play a role here. And right now it's kind of neglected. There are think tanks that are doing the grass tops organizing and helping write policy papers and all of that. But we're neglecting the actual common man's support to to kind of back up their elected rep and say, there are people in your district that care about this, and they will donate to you and they will vote for you and volunteer for you if you support this cause.